Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome.
In our top story, Jerusalem has secured the release of dozens of hostages abducted by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. The Qatar negotiated exchange involved the release of civilian Israeli captives, mostly women and children, in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian terrorists and a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The newly freed hostages have disclosed harrowing accounts of their treatment by Hamas, including the lack of food. Many of them have lost weight and are weak, but most are in stable condition. The hostages say that they slept on plastic chairs and benches, and many of them were kept in the dark for the duration of their captivity. There are also reports of some of the hostages being kept in cages. 25-year-old Ronnie Cravoy reportedly escaped his captors and hid alone for 4 days in Gaza until he was discovered by Arab civilians who turned him over to Hamas. The initial 4-day ceasefire was extended last week in exchange for the release of more hostages. The scenes of families reuniting with their loved ones has given the Jewish people great hope and the strength to fight for the return of almost 200 more that remain in the hands of the Iranian-backed terror group.
Tech mogul Elon Musk donned a bulletproof vest and visited Israeli communities destroyed by the Hamas attacks on October 7th. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu joined Musk on his tour of the Gaza envelope and the devastation that the Iranian-backed terror group left behind. Musk viewed the horrors of the Hamas atrocities and heard briefings from local council members and the families of the hostages. He was also shown video footage of the massacre and expressed his shock at the joy the terrorists demonstrated after killing innocent, defenseless people, including babies. In a live chat on the X platform, Netanyahu and Musk discussed the double war crimes perpetrated by the Hamas death cult. The first was the execution of over 1,200 innocent people. The second was the use of the civilian population of Gaza as human shields.
German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier visited the remains of Kibbutz Be'eri in southern Israel and pledged his country's help to rebuild the community. Steinmeier was joined by his Israeli counterpart, Yitzhak Herzog, who expressed his gratitude for Berlin's support in this difficult time. The presidents visited the remains of Be'eri Art Gallery, and Steinmeier pledged 7 million euros towards rebuilding it. He said the German and Israeli craftsmen will collaborate on the project, which they hope will help to restore the once vibrant kibbutz in southern Israel.
Iranian-backed Houthi rebel pirates from Yemen have wreaked havoc in international waters, hijacking ships and even attacking a freighter with a suicide drone. The terror group crashed the weaponized unmanned aerial vehicle into a Maltese-flagged vessel while it was sailing in the northeastern part of the Indian Ocean. No injuries were reported, but a fire did break out on deck, caused by the explosive-laden UAV. This comes just 1 week after the Iranian terror group hijacked an Israeli-linked ship, the Galaxy Leader, as it was sailing in the Red Sea. In a separate incident, the USS Mason, along with allied ships from the Counter-Piracy Task Force, answered distress calls from a chemical tanker that was attacked in the Gulf of Aden. During the rescue, Houthi rebels in Yemen fired 2 ballistic missiles in the direction of the American warship. U.S. CENTCOM Commander Eric Kurilla released a statement saying, "Maritime domain security is essential to regional stability, and we will continue to work with our allies and partners to ensure the safety and security of international shipping lanes."
The Israel Defense Forces is hunting Hamas leaders across the globe. IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari warned that the terror masterminds who are living a life of luxury in Arab countries are being tracked by Israeli agents. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that he instructed the Mossad to act against the terror leaders, and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant echoed this sentiment, saying that the Hamas heads are living on borrowed time.
U.S. President Joe Biden has issued an apology for questioning the Palestinian death tolls, as reported by the Gaza Ministry of Health, following a major backlash from the Arab world. The Hamas-controlled health ministry has a record of inflating the number of civilian casualties for propaganda purposes. Biden commented that he had no notion the Palestinians were telling the truth about how many people had been killed. Well, the very next day, he met with a delegation of Muslim American leaders and apologized for expressing doubt regarding the number of Palestinian casualties. This apology is seen as a capitulation to the Arab world, as well as by members of Biden's own administration who disagree with the president over his support of Israel.
The International Red Cross is being accused of refusing to transfer life-saving medications to Israeli hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Since the beginning of the war, Israel and world leaders have appealed to the organization to assess the medical condition of the hostages and distribute medications to the chronically ill. The children of 84-year-old Elma Avraham say that they personally gave Red Cross representatives their mother's prescriptions, but the organization refused to accept them on 2 separate occasions. Elma Avram was held in captivity for 52 days without medical treatment or her vital medications. She was released by Hamas last week and was airlifted directly to Soroka Medical Center, where doctors announced that her condition was very bad.
Political pundits are still reeling following the dramatic victory of Geert Wilders in the recent Dutch elections. Wilders is a strong supporter of Israel, and he immediately reminded the world that there is already a Palestinian state in the Middle East. It's called Jordan. The leader of the country's Freedom Party won 37 seats in the election. He promptly set about the task of trying to form a strong and stable coalition to govern the Netherlands. Wilders drew condemnation from the Arab world when he declared that Jordan is Palestine. He recommended that the Arabs in Israel be relocated to the Hashemite kingdom, which is already 80% Palestinian. Arab leaders were furious at the suggestion, claiming that the only solution to the ongoing conflict is a Palestinian state within the borders of Israel.
Schools throughout the Palestinian Authority are celebrating the Hamas massacre of 1,200 people on October 7th. A new report released by the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education, or IMPACT SE, states that at least 11 Arab schools have celebrated the genocide with plays, songs, and art projects glorifying the murder of Jews. Marcus Sheff, the CEO of IMPACT SE, said schools operated by the Palestinian Authority are teaching the same curriculum as that is studied by thousands of terrorists from Gaza, and are publicly celebrating the unspeakable atrocities.
Jerusalem summoned the Irish ambassador to Israel after Ireland's prime minister claimed that a Hamas hostage was merely lost. 9-year-old Emily Hand, who is a dual Irish-Israeli national, was brutally abducted by Hamas terrorists on October 7th and held captive for 50 days in Gaza. She was freed last week as part of a ceasefire and prisoner exchange agreement. Upon her release, Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar wrote that an innocent child who was lost has now been found and returned. Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen blasted the Irish leader's outrageous statement, saying that Varadkar has lost his moral compass and is trying to legitimize and normalize terror.
More than 100,000 people marched in the streets of London to protest anti-Semitism and express their support for the Jewish state as it fights the Hamas terror group in Gaza. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was joined by London's chief rabbi, Ephraim Mirvis, and several politicians and celebrities to march against Jew hatred. One protester told Fox News that the march demonstrates the clash of cultures between Islam and the West. He said, "No one here is screaming for the death of all Muslims. No one here is calling to destroy Gaza, Ramallah, or Jenin. There's no rioting and no violence." There were over 100,000 people dancing and singing, including old and young people, Jews, Christians, Sikhs, Welsh, Iranians, and so many more people supporting the Jewish community and Western values.
Members of the Czech Parliament's Israel Allies Caucus hosted an international forum to discuss the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state. The International Legal Conference on Embassies in Jerusalem and International Law presented the legal arguments that support the establishment of embassies in Jerusalem. Karel Sidlacek, the director of the Israel Allies Caucus in the Czech Republic, said at this time Israel should feel the power of international solidarity in practical actions, and moving embassies to Jerusalem is one of them. The group also advocated to extend the IAF Europe's Prague Declaration to other parliaments. This statement calls on EU nations to pass resolutions officially acknowledging Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel and relocating their respective embassies to the Holy City. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned now for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Etgar Lefkovits. He's the Jerusalem correspondent for JNS. Edgar, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Josh.
Tell our viewers a little about what is JNS.
So JNS is the Jewish News Syndicate, and we cover all the news coming from Israel and the Jewish world. And I cover all the big stories in Israel, having to do now, of course, with the war, what's going on in the south of Israel and north of Israel. And it's basically an international news agency that offers, readers around the world information about Israel.
I follow JNS, and I go to their website often to get, the updates of what's happening during the war. But the news that's on JNS, you don't see that in mainstream media news. You're talking about, what's happening and facts and figures. In the news, in mainstream news, you hear more about, the so-called occupation and the poor Palestinians. They forgot that this is a defensive war. Why is that?
I mean, it's really startling. And I myself have been down to the border area with Gaza 5 or 6 times and have heard these unreal personal stories. And sometimes when you read the mainstream media, you totally feel a total disconnect. And you don't hear the stories of the people whose lives have been irrevocably altered and shattered by this most devastating attack, which killed at least 1,200 people and was the worst single-day attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust.
There are media outlets that refuse to call Hamas a terrorist organization. They were literally burning babies alive, beheading them, raping women and live streaming it, kidnapping Holocaust survivors. What else do you need to be a terrorist? Why are they getting away with this?
In fact, this was a huge scandal that the BBC, for instance, and the wire services until this day, refused to call a terror organization, an internationally declared terror organization, not just by Israel, but by the U.S., by the international community, by the Europeans themselves. And this has been going on for years and years. And with the barbarity that we've seen in these attacks, where, as you said, babies have been murdered in their sleep, women, young children, in this horrific rampage, and yet still they don't want to call them a terror organization. At the most, they'll call it maybe a terrorist attack. But to define Hamas as a terror organization is still one step too far. And, it's absolutely unparalleled in history.
There are also reports that these organizations are complicit with the terror themselves. We saw photographers who work for Reuters, AP, New York Times. They were involved in the actual massacre. They were taking pictures of it. They were standing there. They got advanced knowledge of it. Why aren't these people being brought to justice?
In fact, this just came out how Palestinian freelance journalists working out of the Gaza Strip who contribute for either the wire services or even networks like CNN have actually, perhaps got advance notice or were on a motorcycle with somebody with a grenade on this very day of the attack that happened. It raises a lot of questions. How is this permitted? Now, of course, Israel launched a protest and all this, but this has been going on for years. And what sort of, double standard is at play here?
The question is why? Why do these international news agencies, why do they want to be on the side of evil in this conflict?
In this case, it's really hard to explain because you're dealing with, a democratic state, Israel, against an internationally declared terror organization, Hamas. So it's not like you're dealing with what side you want to take, pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian. It's like, are you on the side of democracy or are you on the side of a terror organization?
You've been covering this, and I've been following it, this story of the massacre and the genocide. in a very deep and personal way, going down and talking to the families of victims. What kind of toll does that take on a reporter to meet with these people, to hear their stories day in, day out? It must be hard.
It really is. And many times when I go and I hear these stories, for example, the story of an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor who lost her son in this devastating attack, her son and 2 other family members, and 7 other family members are kidnapped to Gaza, including her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, aged 3 and 7. You hear these unbelievable stories. You hear a story of a father whose 3 kids and his wife are kidnapped in Gaza. And it does take a toll when you see these horrible sights. But on the other hand, when you see the spirit of volunteerism that's now in the country, this really gives you some incredible boost and force. So on the one hand, you come away shocked, seeing the unimaginable. And on the other hand, you come away strengthened by the resilience of the country.
This war isn't going away anytime soon. We still have to deal with our northern border. Obviously, Iran is behind this. What do you anticipate as the big stories coming in the next few months?
$64,000 question. How is this going to be resolved in the coming months? How long will it take? And who will be the next force? I think this is a big question. Who will be the next force to come into Gaza after Israel attempts to clear the area out of the Hamas terrorists? Who will take over? Will it be an international force? Will it be an improved version of the PA? There's a lot of open questions and a lot of uncertainties.
Edgar, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
This war that you're watching now on your television screens and hearing about is a war that affects so many people here in Israel on a day-to-day lives. You have not only 250,000 people who've been displaced, but virtually every Israeli knows somebody who was either killed or injured in this dastardly carnage. So it's a moment in history where I think it's necessary to take a stand. It's a moment in history where it's clear that there's the forces of good and the forces of evil. And this needs to be said clearly and out loud.
Thank you, Edgar, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, the truth from Zion.
At the core of an important alliance lies an ancient covenant, a promise made to Abraham by God himself. The covenant is a pivotal moment in biblical history. According to the book of Genesis, God promised Abraham and his descendants that they would become a great nation and the land of Canaan would belong to them forever. Genesis chapter 12, verse 3 says, "I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you." This covenant marks the beginning of a special relationship between God and the Jewish people. Christian Zionists believe that they too are part of this covenant. And it is this belief that fuels an unwavering support for Israel and the Jewish people. Over time, the divine plan for the land and the descendants of Abraham was revealed. 2,000 years later, Christianity would emerge with the birth of Jesus. Today's Christian believers are not just praying in churches. They are active members in the continuation of the covenant through faith-based diplomacy. Christians today are advocating all around the world for policies that reflect their convictions.
It is Christians who are gathering and organizing and acting on behalf of the state of Israel and the well-being of its people.
Judeo-Christian values, together with a love for the land of Israel, has led to new, independent, and prophetic initiatives spreading around the world. Organizations like Bridges for Peace and the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem provide Israelis, both Jews and Arabs, with humanitarian assistance, and it's all in the name of alleviating suffering and promoting reconciliation. The Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem is an annual event organized by Christians to pray for the well-being of Jerusalem, highlighting unity and peace in the Holy Land. Legislation like the Jerusalem Embassy Act, passed by the United States Congress in 1995, was a significant step forward. It affirmed American support for Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and called for the relocation of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It took decades to become a reality, but under the bold leadership of former President Donald Trump, and with millions of Christian Americans demanding the move, It was finally accomplished in 2018. The change caused seismic diplomatic shifts for Christian nations around the globe. Several Latin American countries, in a strong show of support, transferred their embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem as well. Guatemala was among the earliest, making the move on May 16, 2018. On March 11th of 2019, Honduras became another staunch supporter of the Jewish people's claim to Jerusalem, solidifying its acknowledgement of the city as the capital. In September of 2023, Papua New Guinea moved their embassy and proclaimed that Christians cannot fully respect God without recognizing the Jewish state's capital. In 2016, the Institute for Christian Leadership Development came to Jerusalem for a visit, where they met with Israeli officials to discuss religious cooperation. In November of 2021, pro-Israel Christians in the Democratic Republic of the Congo organized an event to support Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi's decision to establish a trade office in Israel and grant Israel observer status in the African Union.
It is Christians, not countries, that stand with Israel. Today, 90% of Israel's diplomatic success is attributed to faith-based diplomacy, when Christians take their biblical support for Israel and turn it into real political action.
The result of more and more Christians turning their biblical support into real political action is having a profound effect. By 2022, African Union chief and Senegal's president, Macky Sall, referred to Israel as part of the family of nations.
In 2004, the Knesset, Israel's parliament, started the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. And in 2006, in a show of solidarity, the first sister caucus was started on Capitol Hill, the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus. Today, there are 53 Israel Allies caucuses around the world, made up of Christian legislators. We have over 1,500 legislators in our network, and this is why we're seeing so much success from Christian support for Israel.
They know how important it is for Christians to safeguard Jews and the Holy Land. As normalization and peace deals are brokered and as embassies are moved, the world is witnessing growing and steadfast support from Bible-believing Christians who are doing much to promote the cause of Israel. This alliance holds the potential to chart a new course toward peace and prosperity in the Middle East, and men and women of faith will reap the promise of God's blessings.
Dear friends, Israel is at war. On the 7th of October, around 2,000 to 4,000 Hamas militants poured over the Gaza fence, penetrated it in several locations, and entered in every single one of the 24 communities around the Gaza Strip. The target was not the Israeli military. The target was civilians who were living in those communities, the old, women, children. They were brutally massacred. Reports of decapitated people, but also of many, up to 200 hostages, women and children, old people taking over to the Gaza Strip. Reports of rapes and other atrocity emerged over these last few days. President Herzog said this is the darkest hour of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. As a matter of fact, since the Holocaust, never on a single day were so many Jews murdered than on October 7th. Now let me tell you, this is the time where the Church of Jesus Christ needs to arise. Let me tell you, the time has come where it is not anymore enough to say we love Israel and we stand with Israel. These are times where action is needed from all of us. Please engage Israel today in prayer, in practical help, but also to take a public stand for the Jewish people and for the nation of Israel. Please join us in prayer. We have mobilized a global Esther fast around the world to stand with Israel in this critical time. You can join us on a daily Zoom call to pray for Israel, where you get daily updates and strategies how to pray for Israel in these critical times. Or you can join join our Rosh Chodesh prayer watch that is going 24/7. All the links how you can do so, you can find below. Please pray for Israel. Israel needs your prayer. It is a spiritual battle we are fighting right now against what is called the spirit of Amalek. Secondly, help us practically. If you are a pastor, if you are a leader, a denominational leader, why don't you call this coming Sunday a special Israel Sunday in your church, in your community, in your home group? Why don't you speak about the current crisis, pray for Israel, and collect a special offering for the nation of Israel? We need your help right now. The ICJ is active on so many levels in the land of Israel at the moment. We are helping refugees that fled the Gaza envelope and also the northern community. We are working together with Israelis in trauma counseling. We are helping the reserve units that had to leave from within 24 hours or even less their home bases, didn't have enough time to sometimes pack the essentials that they need there. We are helping civilian volunteer units that are working down along the critical areas to help the needy down on these areas under fires. The ICJ over this last year built bomb shelters. So many requests came in over this past few days. We are serving the Israeli Red Cross with significant contribution for their medical equipment and also to help to buy new ambulances that are desperately needed. Please stand with us. You can find the link below, give.icej.org/crisis. Let us hear from you. And finally, please support Israel on the streets of your city. Too many people come out on the streets with pro-Hamas, with pro-Arab demonstrations that are directed against Israel. Now is the time when the voice of the church needs to be heard in your community. Organize a rally with your church community. Gather several churches together to take a clear stand on your streets and demonstrate for Israel. Also, talk to your politicians. Tell them that Israel needs enough time in this war to deal with Hamas in the proper way. Talk to your politicians to make sure that there will be no stopwatch for Israel, where the communities will say Israel needs to finish that war. Please stand up with Israel. Now is the time for action. Now is the time to pray. And now is the time to give. God bless you here from Jerusalem.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.